Ferguson. I am a senior Ronald E. McNair Scholar attending Siena Heights University. My mentor is Dr. Juliana Frost. I will be presenting my research on the Black Lives Matter movement and human rights efforts. Here's a basic outline of my presentation. I will be going over the background of my research and my research process. This leads me to my research question, which is, what aspects of the Black Lives Matter movement have the potential to inform human rights efforts? To understand why I chose this question and how these topics connect, I will go into a little bit of background information. The main topics of my research are colored white and underlined. When going through the slide, I will state the main point, then move into the specifics, going from left to right, top to bottom. The background of my research starts with human rights. Human rights are what give people a life full of respect and dignity. They work to protect people from severe political, legal, and social abuses, and is based on the claim that people deserve rights on the sole basis that they are human. There are many human rights approaches that determine who receives human rights, what rights they get, where they are applied, why people should receive them, and how they are protected. Two approaches I focus on in my research are Universalism and cultural relativism. These two theories are typically contradictory. Universalism works to have human rights applied universally and the same for everyone, whereas cultural relativism would like rights to be more relative to a country or community's traditions, histories, and values. Who protects human rights is dependent on what theory you use. Typically, the main protectors are the state, non-governmental organizations, and communities. This is where the Black Lives Matter movement comes into play, because they are made up of communities. But they are also working with large actors in the political system, which leads me to my last point. The Black Lives Matter movement is a social movement, and in my research I explore whether their goals, actions, are fighting for human rights, and if the movement structure gives it the potential to expand human rights, universally, cultural relatively, or both. The last main topic I discuss in my research is critical race theory. This theory states that racism is a normal part of life, and institutions are inherently racist because of their historical creations. By recognizing this, I use it as a tool to legitimize the creation of the Black Lives Matter movement and the stories I hear in my research. In the following slides, I will discuss my research and my literature review going in the order listed. Within the literature review on the Black Lives Matter movement, I question what is the Black Lives Matter movement, what is its structure, goals, and actions, and can it be replicated? This brings me to the goal of the movement. The movement wants to dismantle systems harming Black communities. They would like to take them apart, build something to take its place, and have a system where they are dignified communities where Black people can live safely. Additionally, the movement wants racial justice and equity for people of color to have protections that allow them to have freedom and dignity within their lives. They want equal access to education and to dismantle the system that oppresses people of color. In my literature review of the Black Lives Matter movement, I found that the movement has an umbrella structure, with the term Black Lives Matter being an overarching term with many individuals and communities and organizations falling underneath it. What this means is that individuals are taking action and working together to make change in collaboration with other groups in different cities and organizations that are fighting for the same goal. I would like to point out that the Black Lives Matter movement was started by 3 individuals in 2013 because of a person who was killed and the killer was acquitted. It was individuals like Alicia Garza and Patrice Couleurs who made the decision to speak up and take action, but it is individuals that continued that action to create the Black Lives Matter movement. It was from this that people started to work together in their communities to collaborate, to plan protests, and other different ways to make their voice heard. From the very start of the movement, it was communities across the United States that banded together and collaborated with community organizations. The following quote might help you to grasp what community means within the Black Lives Matter movement. skewing traditional hierarchical leadership models. The movement cannot be identified with any single leader or group of leaders, despite the role of Colores, Tomatetti, and Garza, which were the three founders of the movement, who played a role in giving us a social movement hashtag that will likely define our generation. Rather, hashtag Black Lives Matter represents an idea that motivates, mobilizes, and informs the actions and programs of many local branches of the movement. Though community action is a core characteristic of the Black Lives Matter movement, organizations, including the official Black Lives Matter Global Network, continue to strive to create change within the political system versus outside of it through protest and other community actions. From what I could find, the movement only recently, within the past 2 years, started to make a policy change and bring policy to be a bigger part of their organization. Politico expresses this when talking about the Black Lives Matter movement and its formation of a political action committee. The Black Lives Matter movement also pushes for legislation through its own drafting of the Breathe Act and spreading it on social media. Here are 2 examples of the Black Lives Matter movement using social media to push their political agenda. The Black Lives Matter movement has a balancing act of utilizing the passions of individuals to make their voices heard while working with people within the political system. In addition to that, the Black Lives Matter movement makes use of modern technology. Social media was not around 50 years ago, and because of this, it differentiates it from other social movements. Social media is used to recruit new members, spread their messages about getting involved through planning a protest, making their own Black Lives Matter movement chapter, getting involved in policy, or donating to the cause. Social media is used to communicate between members and creates a global network of Black Lives Matter movement chapters that would not be available without the technology we have today. So far, I have gone through the first part of my literature review with the Black Lives Matter movement. The Black Lives Matter movement has a decentralized structure where individuals and communities are the ones pushing for change and collaborating with the organizations. There are both community and political actions where people are using strategies outside of the political system to create change. And all of this is used to accomplish the goal of racial justice and equity. So why are social movements important and what do they do? This quote says it perfectly. The political system has not only failed African Americans, it has contributed to the problem. Political responses to biases in the legal system have failed as African Americans continue to be disproportionately targeted by police, prosecuted, and imprisoned. The Black community has no reason to trust that people representing them in elected office and the political system will work to rectify the problems at the heart of the Black Lives Matter movement. For those who have privilege, it is easy to rely on the system, which has tended to work for them and protect them. For those who the system has not worked, alternatives are needed. The Black Lives Matter movement creates this alternative by focusing its actions within communities and working outside the political system. The next part of my literature review goes into human rights. The following human rights are stated by the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. These rights are not legally binding unless they're written in as law or as a part of the Constitution. There is a right to life, a right to a life without slavery and forced labor, a right to marriage and no discrimination, and the list continues. There are 2 main human rights theories I focus on. Cultural relativism, which states that each culture is so different that there cannot be a universal standard for human rights because of each country having a different cultural base in history and value. Versus universalism states that we all have a shared humanity where we are all human and no matter where we come from, we all deserve the same rights. Next, I focus on my data analysis. I completed a data analysis of existing literature using critical race theory as a framework to understand the historical, political, and ideological contexts that led to the founding of the Black Lives Matter movement. I searched the following databases: JSTOR, EBSCO, ProQuest, Google Scholar, with utilizing the search terms of Black Lives Matter, rights, global, community, individual, and political. I compared and contrasted the literature to find parallels and connections. Additionally, I compared scholarly articles to public sources like public social media and news outlets to create a holistic view of the Black Lives Matter movement. I first used scholarly resources to analyze secondary literature. I used the databases JSTOR, EBSCO, Sage, as well as Google Scholar, as I previously mentioned. I created a holistic view, focusing on the historical, political, and ideological lenses of the Black Lives Matter movement. I break down claims about universalism and cultural relativism to figure out how they can connect to the Black Lives Matter movement and what areas there are parallels. And then, in the end, I created that parallel of the Black Lives Matter movement to universalism and cultural relativism. What I found in my data analysis is that the literature on the critical race theory focuses on shifting conversations from the majority to minority groups. As part of this, there is a pattern of grounding itself in the experiences and perspectives of non-dominant communities. The literature also makes a point in pointing out that systems are the driving force behind racism. The literature on human rights has a theme of pointing out the complexity of human rights and the fact that there are multiple theories and approaches. Many times these approaches conflict, and there is also a main point of saying how we understand the definition of human rights impacts how they are implemented or applied. And then last, the Black Lives Matter movement has the goal of racial justice and a structure that is decentralized, global, and technology-based. And there was actions on all levels, including local, organizational, institutionally, and internationally. So does the Black Lives Matter movement have the potential to inform human rights efforts? The answer is yes. Here's why. When looking at how human rights can be cultural relativist, we realize that Black Lives Matter can be applied to the movement because it's community-based, and each community has a difference within it. And there are distinct ways of action that make it individualized to that community. However, it's also universal because rights are consistent, and there's a common goal of racial justice and equity that is found in every chapter across the world. And it has that globality. So the Black Lives Matter movement can be both universal and cultural relatively because it's community-based, with communities creating this action and this standard and this universal norm. But it is also found universally because these chapters are found globally and have a consistent parallel creation. Overall, the Black Lives Matter movement has the potential to inform human rights efforts because Black people are people, and Black rights are human rights. The movement cannot be replicated because it is community-based and has a common goal and because of modern technology. The limitation of my research is that it mainly focuses on the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States and only focuses on how the movement has the potential to inform human rights efforts. The movement is still new and there isn't much research on its effectiveness, so I can only write about its potential. The significance of my research is that it expands the literature on human rights and social movements. It gives the opportunity to apply human rights theories to a specific event or case and expands literature on the Black Lives Matter movement. All of this is important because everyone deserves human rights, and if the Black Lives Matter movement has the potential to expand human rights universally, then it is important to be aware of how and why they do that. These are the people I would like to acknowledge. Here are my references. Thank you for watching and listening. You may contact me at my email with any questions, comments, or concerns. Thank you for watching my presentation.